I'm Tony Waite, President of APEAL, and today we'll be sharing our thoughts on how steel packaging can help us move towards a more circular economy. But perhaps before I get into that, let me spend a few words talking to you about who APEAL is. APEAL is the Association of European Producers of Steel for Packaging and is based in Brussels. The organisation was founded in 1986 and since last year now has all 5 major producers as members. I'm also pleased to say APEAL employs over 200,000 workers here in Europe, 15,000 of which are directly employed by the production of steel for packaging across 10 dedicated manufacturing sites. But more importantly, what am I going to talk to you about today? Well, it's clear that legislation and public debate are pushing more material circularity into our day-to-day lives. The 2 key topics I want to share with you today is firstly, what are the recent legislative changes? And secondly, how can steel for packaging help Europe achieve a more efficient and more circular economy? It doesn't matter where you sit in the value chain. I don't think any of us can disagree that since 2015, the packaging landscape has changed dramatically, not just in terms of public perception, but also the legislative space is evolving. The first circular economy package was announced in 2015, and with it, it brought higher recycling targets for all materials. The calls for a new approach have continued to gain momentum, and it's fair to say the packaging industry is now in continual movement, as I'm sure you'll all agree. Indeed, what we see is that the European landscape is moving consistently towards a vision of circularity in design, material, and resource use, as opposed to a culture of waste and landfill. The primary legislation was adopted within the Circular Economy Package last year, and it had 3 key directives directly impacting the sector. Firstly, the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, and secondly, the Waste Framework Directive. Here you see within these higher recycling targets for all materials, but also an increased recognition for materials that have got multiple recycling capability. In addition, there's also the indirect impact of the Single-Use Plastics Directive. Now, the secondary implementation of legislation is also currently underway. And within this, there'll be new reporting obligations on composite packaging, which I'll talk more about later. And there's also a change in the calculation point of recycling. It will now move to the final input point of recycling. And what we expect here is the previous rates will take a dip now when the new measurement point takes effect. And of course, there's a European Green Deal, which I'll speak a bit more about later as well. So let me talk perhaps first about those new European reporting obligations. And this is a key piece of information. I'm proud of the lobbying work APEAL did for the industry. And it relates specifically to composite and multi-material packaging. And it specifically is related to the calculation and reporting obligations on packaging. And I won't bore you with all the detail within that, but what you'll see if you read the paragraph in the middle is a key threshold was introduced, where in no more than 5% of the total mass of the packaging unit. Now that key wording is important. And the great news with that change is there's no extra burden for most steel packaging formats. Now, this isn't the case for many other packaging products. Take, for example, a carton that was previously reported as board. That composite carton will now have to be reported in different material formats, whereas a steel aerosol, for example, can continue to be reported as steel packaging. It's important to also note that this is applicable from early in 2020, so you need to take this in mind when you look at your packaging design choices. And if you weren't already aware of this, I ask you to take it back into your organizations, because this key change will make a difference in packaging design choices. So what about the European Green Deal? Well, this is another key topic that was touched upon at the beginning of the year, and it's got 3 key areas of interest for packaging. Firstly, the farm to fork strategy. And here what the European Commission is after is a fair and healthy, friendly food system. More than 1/3 of the food being produced today is thrown away, and we need to prevent that wastage at every stage from farm to fork. The second element is a circular economy action plan. This is one of the main building blocks of a deal, with 35 actions along the entire life cycle of the products. The packaging waste prevention measures is just one example of those where changes to the waste hierarchy are proposed. Now, what about the green claims? Well, within this, the Commission is aiming to empower the consumer ready for the green transition. What the European Commission wants to do is to establish a legal framework that provides a level playing field. It wants to control the methods to measure and assess environmental impact, but also change the way labels and claims are made to make sure for producers in Europe and outside of Europe, a fair and transparent playing field is made. Now, another area, I don't know about you, but even though my day-to-day job is in packaging, as a consumer, I find the labelling and the wording confusing and often misleading, as we just touched about in the Green Deal. But as a consumer, I think we all need to ask ourselves when we read that label, what does recyclable really mean? Does it actually mean recycled? So when packaging is marketed as can be recycled, is it really? And I often ask myself, is it recyclable in a few places, or is recycling widespread? Is it easy to separate each part of the material? Is it entirely recyclable, or are some parts difficult to recycle? Is it recyclable once, twice, or is it infinitely recyclable? And also I ask myself the question, is it economically viable to recycle it, or does it need subsidies? I think this is a good example of the clarity the green claims aspect of the Green Deal are trying to improve. Now, with measures along the entire life cycle of products, the new Green Deal also aims for a more circular economy that keeps resources in use. Now, some may feel this is a nice to have from the European Commission, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's worth noting that in her recent State of the Union address in Brussels, the European Commission President von der Leyen again stated her commitment to deliver on the Green Deal. So in my view, it's here to stay. So moving on to steel for packaging. Well, I'm lucky in the day-to-day role I have. The product we produce is circular by nature. Steel is a material designed for recycling over and over again. The material stays just as strong every time, and that's because of the inherent properties of steel. They don't change however many times they're recycled. Steel for packaging is also easy to recover, and that's due to the unique magnetic properties of steel. All you need to recycle it is a magnet. And even though separate collection is key to high quality recycling, when that's not even possible, steel packaging that's discarded with residual waste can also be recovered via pre-treatment processes as well. Now we've also got a recycling process that brings environmental benefits. The more steel scrap we use, the more savings can be made of raw materials, of energy, and of emissions. So you get environmental and economic advantages if you recycle steel. A ready market is also available for steel scrap. Steel scrap material already has a value with an extensive ready and local market. And as you can see on the map here, there's over 500 steel plants available for that process to take place. Steel scrap is an essential part of the manufacturing process of new steel. No subsidy is needed or a need to be creative, as opposed to other packaging materials. Indeed, for the moment, the scrap requirement far outweighs the available scrap quantities. So yes, steel for packaging is a true model material for a circular economy. As a permanent material, from the moment steel enters the material loop, it can be recycled again and again into new steel products. It's got no loss of its inherent chemical and physical properties. In fact, steel created decades ago can still be recycled today and used in new products. And that's why I'm proud to work in the steel industry and be in front of you. And I can proudly say steel is the most recycled material in the world. And it's the most recycled primary packaging material here in Europe. And we set ourselves our own ambitious targets. And I'm pleased to say in 2018, we met our target 3 years early that we set ourselves, with 82.5% being met as a recycling rate for steel packaging here in Europe. I think another key point about steel packaging is all segments are highly recycled and available. What I see in other substitute products is there's very one strong performing category. We don't just have best performers. Beverage cans can be recycled, closures can be recycled, aerosols can be recycled, general line paint cans can be recycled, or food cans, and they're all equally recyclable and used in day-to-day recycling facilities across Europe. So that's another key benefit of our product. But of course, not everything's great, and it'd be wrong to sit here in this room and not mention the word emissions. So I recognise as an industry we've still got a long way to go, but I think it's also important to highlight that our industry has already halved energy usage and CO2 emissions since 1960. So we're well on that path. But that's the past. More importantly, what about the future? And I think it's important to realise that the European steel industry also share the European objective of carbon neutrality by 2050. The expectation is that the targets will have an 80 to 95% reduction by 2050. The European industry in steel is one of the most advanced in terms of its low carbon projects. But however, we can talk the great numbers, but success will always be measured in the outcome. And it's important that we have a sustained existence of thriving, innovative and decarbonised domestic steel industry here in Europe. It's worth noting that all APEAL member companies are currently demonstrating their ambitions, whether that be to reduce emissions by 2030, whether it be to carbon neutral by 2030 or carbon neutral by 2050. Everyone has got a different roadmap, which has been made public, and we're on path to achieve that. And I think when people talk to me about the emissions side of steel, I think you also need to look at what products the steel industry goes into. Steel has a key point in mitigating CO2 here in Europe. So if you look at electric car motors, if you look at wind turbines, they all need steel. Now, another key topic is the recycling rate. Why do we use a recycling rate and not recycled content to measure steel sustainability? Well, I think here it's important to understand that the recycled content focuses on a product's previous life. It doesn't guarantee the current product is designed to be recycled at the end of its life. So if you look at this picture here, nice tomato in a steel packaging can, doesn't matter what the recycled content of that can is, if it's not recycled, all those embedded resources and the energy go to waste. So the material's not just limited to only one recycling loop. Regardless of the recycling potential here, we need to make sure those multiple recycling loops are used over and over again. But we recognise as an industry you need different metrics for different materials. So if the waste supply is greater than demand, well, measuring with recycled content is important because that helps reduce waste. But for some of the reasons I've already mentioned, that metric for us doesn't make sense. Where scrap supply is not an issue, recycled rate is important. So here we can increase the amount of scrap used if we focus on the recycled rate. And if you take that fact, it's perhaps using the right definitions which show today that 75% of steel's products ever made are still actually in use today. And that really is thanks to that multiple recycling point. So best practices already show that higher recycling rates are possible. If you look at the top 5 European steel packaging recyclers, you can see that they're already very close to closing that recycling loop. So here you see with the Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, Germany, Norway, already well over 90%. And APEAL is committed to helping all European member states, not just those our country producers are in. It's important if we're going to achieve these rates going forward, we work with all member states to make sure we focus on those higher recycling targets as set out in the circular economy package. So higher recycling requires a holistic approach. We need to work together and share the best practice. We need to have a reference point to learn more about a real and successful recycling story. And that's why as APEAL, we wrote a white book and paper on good practices in separate collection, sorting and recycling of steel for packaging. And there's 4 key recommendations that came out of that. The first one was separate collection or source separation. Separate collection is key if you want to achieve higher quality recycling. You need to get better quality scrap collection and no recyclable packaging back to landfill. The second recommendation is a quality standard for steel packaging scrap. This is key to delivering high quality packaging scrap and also making sure there's traceability. The quality control has to start at the sorting facility and national standards must be set. The third recommendation we make is the transparent verification and reporting of recycling. the measurement of real recycling, guidelines, definitions, and strict reporting formats for EU member states. You also need to have clear tracking and tracing systems for the scrap. Another thing that's key in our opinion is raising the awareness with campaigns and activity. Recycling starts at the home. You have to have the right bin infrastructure, and you need to educate people from an early age in terms of those right bins. So we've done quite a lot of that as members in recent years, not just as steel producers, but also through the whole value chain. So if you take the Metal Recycles Forever logo, that's gaining traction now. It was launched in 2014 and becoming more and more visible on brands across Europe. You'll see in the image on the top left there, the sticker on the top of a can. There's also been specific campaigns in the Netherlands with Bonduelle around that. And if you take the Metal Matters campaign, that was also set up to help local authorities promote curbside metal recycling and increase household participation in metal packaging recycling schemes. And that was also a great success. So it's important that our consumers are able to make a conscious choice for materials that can be and are recycled. We need to demonstrate that the food can today can also be something useful in the future, like a bicycle tomorrow. And there's two great examples of APEAL members partnering with retailers at the point of sale to raise that awareness that steel is a material that can be used and can be recycled. So with both Edeka and with Albert Heijn, a steel bicycle was heavily used in promotions there, and people could go in, buy the steel packaging can, enter competitions and win a very trendy retro steel bike. And both the retailers pointed out to incredibly successful campaigns as a result of those.
Steel is designed for recyclability. A can might become a train, and a train become a bicycle. An aerosol container might become a wind turbine, and on, because the inherent properties of steel don't change, no matter how many times it is recycled. Every year, the European steel industry increases the amount of recycled material used to make new steel. Across Europe, 82% of used steel packaging is currently recycled into new steel products, and it's fundamental to lowering emissions, using fewer natural resources, and preventing waste. In other words, that's a real circular economy.
If you've got any more information you'd like, please look at our websites here, and you can see where we've got some great content available, or please reach out to us as well.